Okay. This is chapter 2 of part 1 of The Truth About Clergy Sexual Abuse by Bill Donahue. Chapter 2. The Church Confronts the Scandal. The first molesting priest to capture public attention was a Louisiana cleric, Gilbert Goth. That was in 1985. Ironically, it was at a time when clergy sexual abuse was subsiding, though few knew it then. Goth pleaded guilty to 11 accounts of molestation and was sent to prison. Another priest, James Porter, made big news when his predatory behavior in Fall River, Massachusetts, was revealed in the early 1900s. In the late 1900s, Rudolph Koss became a public figure when the Dallas diocese was ordered to pay more than $31 million to his victims. Immediately following this disclosure was the indictment of Boston's John Giohan, a serial child rapist who was murdered and imprisoned. Goth was sentenced to 20 years in prison for sexual abuse of more than 3 dozen boys. His victim ranged in the age from 7 to 15. As Mary Eberstadt put it, he was a sexually active gay man with a taste for children and adolescents too. How was it possible for a serial molester to go unnoticed by other priests, nuns, lay people, and his bishop? It wasn't. Goth's superior knew for 10 years what he was doing. After he molested his first victim, he quickly learned that nothing would be done to him. His bishop told him to confess his sins. That was it. The bishop never mentioned it again. After Goth was moved to another parish, the abuse continued, and so did the complaints. This is the kind of response that enrages Catholics. Bad as Goth was, it's even worse that his bishop allowed him to continue his crimes against children with impunity. Did the Vatican know what was going on? Not while he was preying on his victims. But by 1984, news about Goth had reached the Vatican embassy, and it assigned one of its canon lawyers, Father Thomas Doyle, to deal with his case. Father Doyle issued a series of reports providing evidence that Goth was not the only predator priest in the active ministry. In 1985, Pope John Paul II assigned Bishop A.J. Quinn of Cleveland to investigate the scandal in Louisiana. According to Doyle, besides a press conference announcing a committee to study the situation, nothing was done about it. Indeed, the committee was never established. Doyle and Goth's attorney, Ray Moulton, prepared a report on priestly sexual abuse and sought out to present it to the bishops in the spring of 1985. They warned of more scandals, but the efforts too went nowhere. Bishop William Levin of Los Angeles showed support for Doyle and Moulton, but in the end he told Doyle that their work would not be given to the bishops at their upcoming meeting in Collegeville, Minnesota. After the bishops' meeting, a pastoral letter was issued, but it was not on clergy sexual abuse. It was on poverty. It was written by Milwaukee Archbishop Rembert Weekland, who would later be forced to resign over sexual and financial misconduct. For the next 30 plus years, Father Doyle worked on clergy sexual abuse cases, helping those make accusations against Catholic priests and the lawyers defending them. And it appears that this role has taken a toll on both of them and on the church. On both of them and on the church. In 2019, he said, "Most of my adult life has been involved with this issue. It changed me dramatically. It's changed my belief system. I no longer have any trust in the institutional church. It could have been said that the feeling was mutual." He was removed in 2003 from his assignment as a chaplain in the Archdiocese of Military Services, a post he had held since 1986. The head of the Archdiocese, Archbishop Edwin F. O'Brien, accused Doyle for not following orders, such as requirement to offer daily mass for Catholics on military base. Doyle is now known for an inactive priest and former member of the Dominican order. Boston Globe unloads. Barely a week in 2002, the Boston Globe rolled out its series on the sexual abuse of minors in the Catholic Church. It stunned the nation and outraged Catholics. At the time, it was not apparent that the media would exploit the scandals to sell headlines and perhaps to undermine the institution whose teaching they reject. It was a rare event in 2002 to read a newspaper account of the scandals that was patently unfair, much less anti-Catholic. The Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, and the New York Times covered the story carefully with professionalism. The evening news anchors on television similarly did what they were supposed to do: report, not editorialize. Peter Jennings did a 1-hour special on the scandal that was handled with distinction. The problem we had with the media were mostly limited to pundits, cartoonists, and scriptwriters for TV shows. I wrote that in the Catholic League's 2002 annual report on the anti-Catholicism. The anger and the fury that rocked Catholics was direct at the church, not the media. A front-page story in Sunday New York Times in March 2002 quoted me saying, "I am not the church's water boy. I am not here to defend the indefensible." It was not something I wanted to say. I am known for vigorously defending the church, but intellectual dishonesty is something I despise. The Times story accurately described my position. He also sounded what had become a dominant theme in the conservative reaction to the scandals, that the victims of sexual abuse were primarily adolescent boys, not younger children, and that there is a link between the abuse and the number of gay men in priesthood. I told the newspapers that the priesthood had gone soft, allowing for an open rebellion against the church's sexual ethics. I also noted that a certain unmanliness has taken place. This was not received well by the so-called progressive Catholics. In April 2002, Pope John Paul II summoned American cardinals and leaders of the Bishops' Conference to meet with him in what was known as the Vatican Summit. The Holy Father said that there is no place in religious life for abusers. Not only did the words carry weight of the leaders of the Catholic Church, but they came just 2 months before the annual meeting of the U.S. bishops, who convened that year in Dallas. What the Pope said was much appreciated by Catholics. Still, when asked at the time what I had thought about the state of the Church, I could not omit to being mollified. I do not know of a single Catholic priest or layman who isn't furious about the sex abuse scandal in terms of the tolerance the hierarchy, have had for intolerable behavior, and the way they played musical chairs with these miscreant priests. I never seen such anger. As the Dallas conference approached, Catholics were cautious. I said as much when asked by the New York Times about my faith in the church's hierarchy to rectify matters. I don't know if they can set it straight. It has to do with what has been lacking in these men all along: common sense and courage. There's an impatience now. American Catholics are not going to wait ad infinitum, infinitum, in, infinitum, infinitum, in, infinitum for this now for this church to change. I was not alone in feeling uneasy. Liberals such as Father Richard McBride and conservatives such as Phil Lawyer both cited the need for the bishops to reestablish the trust in Catholics. They were skeptical about the prospects. Days before the meeting, the U.S. Bishops' Ad Hoc Committee on Sexual Abuse released a draft of the proposed documents that would be voted on the conference. I was relieved and said at the time, the draft is a reasonable document that should allay the worst fears of the skeptical laity. It is thoughtful, pointed, and fair to all priests. 3 days later, I was warned about the new problem on the horizon: the exploitation of the scandals by steeple-chasing lawyers. Whether motivated by the potential for huge monetary gains, contempt for the Catholic Church, or both, such lawyers could do serious harm to the Church's mission. At the time, I questioned why only Catholic priests were being targeted by lawyers, while ministers, rabbis, teachers, social workers, and therapists were given a pass. These lawyers, along with victim groups, wanted a statute of limitations lifted in the cases of priestly sexual abuse, but showed no interest in having this apply across the board to others. No wrongdoings by the Church justifies the attempts to plunder its resources by rewriting the law, I said. This is the work of bandits disguised as attorneys. On June 7th, 2002, the New York Times published an op-ed ad I had written. All eyes are on Dallas. I expressed my concern that not even the best written guidelines will end the scandal. What was needed, I said, was what Pope John Paul II called for at the Vatican Summit in April, namely, the pastors of the Church need clearly to promote the correct moral teaching of the Church and publicly to reprimand individuals who spread dissent. To which I added, it does not exaggerate to say that nothing enables behavior deviance more than theological dissidents. The run-up to Dallas ended in an ominous note. It was on the eve of the Bishops' Conference that CBS showed 60 Minutes introduced Americans' Gilbert Goth's horrific act to the equally horrific delinquency of the Church's officials. The bishops had their backs to the wall. The 60-minute segment on Goth set the stage for what was about to happen. The Dallas Reforms and accused priest. The Dallas Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, was a comprehensive list of reforms that did much to quell the anger of most Catholics. It established a National Review Board to conduct an annual review of the way dioceses and eparchies are addressing clergy sexual abuse. The Office of Child and Youth Protection was formed to keep tabs on the issue as well. It developed norms for the diocese and the eparchies, including review boards that will investigate claims of abuse at the local level. Importantly, confidentiality clauses in settlements with victims were prohibited, unless requested by the victims. The Catholic Church does not get enough credit for prohibiting confidentiality agreements. It stands in stark contrast to common practices elsewhere. For example, Hollywood celebrities accused of sexual misconduct routinely avail themselves of confidentiality agreements. Such secret agreements allow Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein to get away with their predatory behavior for decades. One of the persons who helped Weinstein negotiate secret settlements was a feminist attorney, Gloria Allred. It seemed that for years, many professional women who considered themselves feminists were silent or even complicit in sexual misconduct at the highest level of society. That is, until the Me Too movement got rolling. Perhaps the most controversial reform made at the Dallas Conference was the adoption of a zero-tolerance policy. It allowed for the permanent removal of priests or deacons from the ministry if he admits to sexual abuse or is found guilty of it. However, the policy did not apply to bishops. The Vatican subsequently made it applicable. Having zero tolerance for anyone who sexually abuses a minor sounds, on the face of it, a wholly justified response to a horrendous crime. There was, however, a prospect of swinging the pendulum too far, and this gave some Catholics pause. But there is a problem regarding the rights of the accused, I said. It appears that the charter may short-circuit some due process rights. No one was more forceful in this criticism of the lack of due process for accused priests than the Cardinal Avery Dulles. The bishop's documents, he said, puts a very adversarial relationship between the bishops and the priests. The priest can no longer go to his bishop in confidence with the problem that he has. He has to be very careful what he says to the bishops because the bishops can throw him out of the ministry for his entire life. Dulles outlines his concerns about the Dallas Charter in the Pages of America. The influential Jesuit magazine refers to the zero-tolerance rule he wrote. The bishops adopted the very principles that they themselves had condemned in their critique at the secular judicial system. He said he was distressed at the prospect of having an accused priest removed from the ministry without regard to his due process rights. In addition to the injustice done to the priest, this move would leave the faithful to believe he was guilty without his being proven as such. Dulles was also alarmed at the ambiguity of the language of the charter and of its failure to distinguish minor offenses and more serious ones. Then there was the question of adjudicating old cases. This is not easy to do when one's considered that memories fade or become distorted, witnesses die or leave the area, and physical evidence become more difficult to obtain. He said was particularly incensed that the bishops did not include in the charter something the Pope implored them to consider, The power of Christian conversation. Adjudicating. Dallas was not alone in expressing reservations about the zero tolerance policy. In fact, 4 months before Dallas Charter was issued, the Vatican's Pontifical Academy for Life published a report by non-Catholic psychiatrists and psychologists said a zero tolerance policy was mistaken. Even the New York Times admitted against overreacting. We do not favor defrolicking one-time offenders who have rehabilitated themselves, said an editorial. Like the bishops, we believe in recovery and redemption. The newspaper's position was published just before the Dallas Conference convened. In October 2002, the Vatican appointed a joint commission of bishops, 4 from the United States and 4 from the Holy See, to revise certain provisions of the Dallas Charter. The changes were submitted to the United States bishops at their next meeting. In November, the Vatican rightfully objected to some of the ambiguity in the Charter and the lack of due process rights for accused priests. For some were critical of the Joint Commission, but none more than Father Andrew Greeley. Without any evidence, he said, that the cardinals reviewing the charter were convinced that the sex abuse crisis was created by Jewish controlled media to punish the church for its support for a Palestinian state. Father Thomas G. Guarino, a professor of theology at Seton Hall University, is a brilliant champion of rights of priests. He argued that most every accused is deemed credible unless the accused can prove that 30 years ago, and most accusations from decades long past, he was on a different continent when the alleged abuse occurred. In other words, credible has to mean not entirely impossible. Look back at what happened in Dallas. Guarino is not pleased. The bishops were sold a bill of goods in the charter, concocted by PR agents and the lawyers, but without solid Catholic theology. And now they are too frightened by attorney generals, the media, lawyers, advocate groups, and disgruntled laity to seek justice. It is distressing to note that almost 2 decades after scandal became known, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, who was president of the Bishop Conference at the time, admitted that lawyers were still working on what it means to be credibly accused. Even more worrisome is that the onus of proof has been removed. Instead of a priest being innocent until proven guilty, he is guilty until proven innocent. No one knows this better than Cardinal George Pell, who was imprisoned for a crime he did not commit, although he was finally exonerated. He was finally exonerated. For years, he had to endure the condemnation of activists, jurists, and pundits who accepted the accusations against them without evidence as they worked their way through the Australian justice system. The situation is ominous. I received correspondence from priests including bishops, alarmed over the way determinations of the situation is ominous. I received correspondence from priests, including bishops, alarmed over the determinations of guilt are being made. It takes very little in some dioceses to award compensations to alleged victims, even those with very shaky stories. An 85-year-old priest contacted me because he is being accused by a known drug addict of an alleged offense that took place 40 years ago, and his plea of innocence means nothing. His name was posted in the diocesan newspaper as an accused priest. This man is being deprived of his presumptions of innocence. His reputation is being destroyed before his guilt has been proven. Even if he is guilty, the treatment is a violation of our country's principles of justice. If he is innocent, this is a travesty, and he is not alone. Even priests who have been accused and found not guilty still have their names posted on diocesan websites among the accused. The emotional damage done in cases like this is not confined to priests. My uncle's name appeared on the list of priests accused of sexual abuse issued last week by the Archdiocese of Baltimore. I would like to call him and ask him, what should I think about this? But he died in 1981. Where is the fairness in defaming to defend themselves? The statement was published in the letter to the Washington Post in 1920. Even more distressing are public demands that priests are entitled to no due process rights. Some want priests immediately removed from ministry as soon as the accusation is made. We understand that proven guilty, but we're talking about mostly vulnerable people in our society, and those are the children. If this were just the musings of a blogger, it wouldn't mean much. But this is the position of Annie Burke, who served as the head of the first National Review Board commissioned by the bishops to deal with the clergy sexual abuse. At the time, she was an Illinois appellate court justice. She was later elevated to Chief Justice of the court. In an interview I had in my office with a female reporter from CNN, she became quite critical of the church for not posting the names of accused priests on its diocese website. I picked up the phone and, holding it in my hand, asked her for the name and phone number of her boss. When she asked why, I said I was going to accuse her of sexual harassment. I add that I wanted to see if CNN would post her name on the website. She said, "I get it." I put down the phone. No organization in the United States is expected to post the names of employees accused of sexual misconduct, except for the Catholic Church. This expectation is absurd and unfair, and wins no one over. The Church should not have to do this. Instead, it should insist on a level playing field and protect the rights of accused priests, just as every other institution in the nation protects its employees.